share. Wonderful. Just bear with me while I get my screens organized the way I want. Cool. Almost there. All right. Hi all, my name is Samantha and my pronouns are she and her. As a point of visual access, I'm a pretty short white woman. I have long curly brown hair, but the picture you see on the screen, my hair happens to be straight. And I work in Philadelphia at a nonprofit. I work at the largest private philanthropy in the city of Philadelphia, the William Penn Foundation. We make about $120 million a year in grants to nonprofit organizations. Outside of work, I have a blog dedicated to spreadsheets, social justice, databases, and the civil rights movement. It might seem like an unconventional mixture of topics, but trust me, it's really, really fun to write, and I hope it's just as fun for you all to read. I'm active on Twitter. You're going to learn more about me and what's important to me during this presentation, but things you might not otherwise know is that I love Nutella. I'm deeply committed to fiber arts as a personal hobby, and I've spent all of my career in the nonprofit sector. Okay, having a technical, there we go. This is a picture of my blog where you can see some of the topics that I find most interesting, and I am in the beginning phases of creating a new suite of resources on Khan Composer for a nonprofit audience. So where are we in the automation world? Today I'm going to be talking about how to move data into a Salesforce sandbox. I'm going to talk about why this is a pressing concern and the fact that there's more than one way to do it effectively. We're going to go in depth into a flow that I've built for sandbox seeding purposes. Then I'm going to do a live demo. So join me in crossing your fingers. No, I have a lot of confidence that the live demo is going to go well. Because we're in kind of uncharted territory with using Flow for this particular use case, I'm going to go into a bit more depth about some warnings that you should keep in mind as you endeavor to build similar functionality in your orgs. And I want to save time at the end to talk about my team because this use case and solution emerged out of community collaboration, and I wouldn't have been able to build it if I wasn't in such deep partnership with people inside of a program called Open Source Commons, which is part of Salesforce.org impact area. Data Generation Toolkit is a community project. It's an open source project. We host all of our work in GitHub. Anyone can contribute and see what we're up to. We've created documentation as well as usable recipes for populating Salesforce org instances using a developer tool called Snowfakery. This team is really robust and amazing. It has been a wonderful jumping off point for me as I figure out how I want to continue to push myself with my goals and give back to the community. And if not for this group, there would be no community-owned solution for the empty sandbox problem that we're going to be tackling today. Let's talk about the problem. Sandboxes and dev orgs are great for Salesforce admins, developers, consultants, and architects, but it's very difficult to use them without valid data. In fact, there's very little that you can do at all. And populating orgs with data is hard. First, you have to, what I call stage the data. You have to come up with what records should go in the sandbox in the first place. And then you have to migrate the data, which is a whole process in and of itself, whether you're doing it the data loader kind of way or another ETL, or whether you're using more advanced migration functionality. There's not really an easy way to get data from a spreadsheet into a sandbox in a way that you can quickly use for all different types of use cases. So I think a lot of us don't use sandboxes as much as we should be. That can look like making changes in production, not that I've ever done that. It could look like using out-of-date sandboxes where the metadata is out of date, but at least you have data in it. It can look like avoiding building features at all because it's just too overwhelming to create a reasonable development environment. And I say this as an admin. I like to use the partial sandbox that we get from Salesforce, but a lot of the time, the other half of a lookup relationship doesn't exist, or the sample records doesn't meet the kinds of sample records that I need for the testing that I want to do. And it kind of just leaves me in a no good options situation. And I see there's about 100 of you here. I'm not actively reading the chat, but I can imagine that I'm not the only person who is faced with this dilemma. From the last 3 years of figuring out this valid test data situation, I've learned that it's very difficult to quickly generate meaningful test data. Partial sandboxes don't get the job done. There are third-party apps that can do it, but they're expensive and require capacity to set up in the first place. And developers can write code to do it, but what about those of us who are admins? How are we going to be able to use sandboxes the way everyone says we're supposed to? I see so many social posts that are like, use sandboxes, do everything in a sandbox first. It's like, sure, great advice, but how do I actually do that? So I just want to say, now that we're all here, that I have been persuaded that we really should be doing everything in a sandbox, even just making a new field. And most of the time when I hear people talking about this, it's for testing purposes because we want to make sure that we don't break other things in our Salesforce orgs by adding new functionality. But today I want to take us on a different path of exploration, and I want to talk about why sandboxes are uniquely valuable for training and onboarding new staff who need to learn the ropes of how your Salesforce instance is set up. The reason why I think it's so powerful to train in a sandbox is that we can keep production clean and reliable. I don't know about you, but I have an account in my Salesforce instance in production called test.org, and I make opportunities in there sometimes if I'm trying to just show somebody something. But what if I did all of that in a sandbox so everyone who's running reports in my org doesn't accidentally scoop up fake data that shouldn't be there? I'm also really interested in providing a more consistent training experience for new hires. So if I always have the same records, then I can give them a worksheet that says, look up so-and-so and find the opportunity there, and the opportunity will always be there. I love the idea of telling a new staff member, make some records. It's okay if they're not set up properly. I will check them and we will learn together. And it's a relatively common instance where the metadata are the same if you have a new sandbox. So for training purposes, the person is going to be able to access what it's like to be in production without all of the risks with training in production and the costs with training in production. All of this sounds like a rosy picture, but then we go back to the problem we had before, which is, sure, train in a sandbox, but how are we going to put data in the sandbox? I don't want to create all of those records manually. It's a huge drain of time, it's tedious, and we have higher value work to be doing. So join me in exploring this user story. As a Salesforce admin, I need to spin up a sandbox with reliable data every time I train a new hire. Bear with me. we're gonna get deep into flow, but I wanna sidebar and say, this is an unusual application of flow that does not, because of platform limitations, it doesn't truly represent all of the best practices with flow that you might use for other use cases. It works really well for small data sets in a sandbox environment, but you might hit limits if you're trying to build data sets that are too big for flow to be able to handle. This flow that we're going to look at together, it uses a lot of create and get flow elements, which are considered DML expressions, and those are the most costly elements in flow. And we're limited to using only 150 of them in any flow solution. So while this wouldn't work in production or for large data sets, it's perfect for my admin goal because I'm only going to be creating a handful of records at a time, and I know that flow can handle this well. So proceed ahead with caution and creativity and mindfulness that, you know, we're a little off-road here. So the first question you want to answer as you're thinking about this is, what kind of records do I want my data set to have? This is a real demonstration. You can see there's even like a coffee or grease stain on it. This is the page that I made when I was modeling out, okay, we need some organizations, we need some grants, we need some campaigns, we need some budgets. These are the kinds of records I want to have in my test org, because these are the kinds of records that I want my new staff to learn how to interact with. You might organize your flowchart a little bit differently, but I think that you should be able to represent the story you want your data to tell, and at the very least, figure out how many objects you need represented in your data set, because that's going to come up again later. And here's a tip. Consider making some bad data in your flow, like maybe an opportunity in the wrong record type, or a close date that's in the past for an opportunity where the stage is still open, or something weird like that, because when you're training somebody, you want to show them why a record might be set up wrong. And sure, you can make validations and record types and all that stuff be able to prevent some of these mistakes, but we all know what bad data look like in our orgs, and this is an amazing teaching opportunity to be able to show somebody, this is a record that's not set up properly, and this is how you fix it. Are you ready to go with the flow? I think you are. So public service announcement, we're gonna review what's what with our data model, because you really need to be up close and personal with your data model to be able to do this type of flow building. So in flow, each record that we're designing is going to be defined by an assignment element in flow. Those are the one of the little orange flow elements. Each field or here, oh, we're not showing a lot of fields here, is going to be one of the is going to be populated inside of an assignment element, and you're going to get to see what this looks like. And then each object is going to be grouped inside of a collection variable. So we're going to take all these records that we're going to be assigning, we're going to put them into a collection variable, and then we are going to create all of those records all at once, which is going to make our flow more efficient. Another word you might see as you're learning flow is it'll be considered bulkified, because we're going to make more than one record at a time. So bear with me, because I'm going to break this down further to show you exactly how everything is set up. So start with an auto-launched flow. This means it's not triggered by a record. It's not started by a screen. It's just a flow that lives in the background metadata of your org. And you can go to the flow itself to launch it when you create a new sandbox. You don't have to build your flow this way. This is how I built the example flow that I'm sharing with you. But you could make this more complicated by saying, run this flow when I create my first record, or there's 6 different types of training flows, put them into a screen element, and then let the user determine what type of data the sandbox should be populated with. You can do all kinds of extra complexity here, but for the MVP of this project, all you really need is an auto-launched flow. And then you're going to assign your records with these little orange doohickeys. So here's an example. I'm assigning field values for the record campaign 1 that will be created down here. So I created a new assignment flow element. I gave it a name, a nice descriptive name, campaign 1. You could use a campaign name that would match your business process. And I took the fields that are required for a campaign and I hard coded them here. So I typed in, like, it will be called board meeting 1. You could make these be field references or formulas or something, but I just basically, this is as if I'm typing it into a new record creation. So this is an example of assigning one record. And in this example, I decided that I needed 2 campaigns in my org because I want to show the difference between them when I'm training somebody. So this one is a board meeting 1. Maybe the other one is a different record type. I can't remember what I decided. And so I created 2 of them, and then I did this group records. And this is a fundamental flow concept of grouping records into a collection variable. So I made a collection variable called campaign collection. Not a very creative name. And then first I added campaign 1, and then I added campaign 2. And the reason why this is important is because when we use our create campaigns element here, then it's going to look at what's in the collection and it's going to create all of them for us, which saves us a little bit of processing power. Okay, so this is an example of the create records, that pink element that I was emphasizing on the previous slide. And we're going to create more than 1 record because we're going to create everything that's been added to the campaign collection variable. So you're going to follow this type of process for every object that you're creating records for. Just going to pause for a moment to let that sink in because it's pretty important. Now, this is a little tricky. After we create the campaign records, then we need to get them. I know this seems contradictory and abstract, but the way flow works, even though you assigned it, once the record is created, flow doesn't store the ID of that record. And you might want to reference that record later in the flow. For example, what we're going to talk about is I'm going to create an opportunity, and I want that opportunity to be attributed to this campaign. So I need to get the campaign I just created so that the ID is stored in a flow variable. And then I'm going to use that variable when I'm creating an assignment for the next record that is part of my whole data story. So I'm using get records here, and I'm showing you that I'm looking for a record that has the name of the campaign that I just created, and then I'm creating a variable that's going to store the ID so that I can reference this later in my flow. You have to do this for every record that is referenced in another record later in the flow. And this is part of how we're creating this synthetic relational database where we're creating records and referencing them later. It's mimicking what you do when you create a record and populate a lookup field, but we're doing it all up front and telling the flow where to find the record that should be the lookup value. Caveat, yes, this part is kind of lousy to set up, and it seems like we shouldn't be using so many get records elements. If in the future Flow is able to store the record IDs that it creates, that would make this whole thing way more scalable and easy to build. But based on my current interpretation of Flow features and based on my understanding of how to build these minimally complex data sets, this is the process that you go through. And I just want to say, if you are feeling discouraged, just think that once you do this in your flow will do all of the lookup populating for all of the records you create in every sandbox where you run this flow. So even though it's annoying for setup, I think that if you run this enough times, you actually really get a lot of value from it. So I think you should stick with me through this presentation and through trying this out, even though this part is really annoying. So here's an example of another edit where I'm hard coding a record type. You could also look up a record type by name if you want to, or store them as a variable, but I kind of took the easy way out here. And here's my opportunity that I'm creating. I want it to be assigned to a campaign, which in my org we call dockets. And I already created a campaign inside of the flow that's going to be the value for this lookup field. And I did the same thing here. I want my opportunity to be connected to an organization. I already created the organization. I already did a get records search to store the organization ID. And now I can reference it in an opportunity that has 2 lookup fields inside of the flow. Keep going. You will have a lot of flow elements. In fact, you're going to have, I think I have a formula later in this deck, but you're going to have at least 2 for every object and at least 1 for every record. And so it kind of adds up quickly. Once you have your flow filled out the way you want it to, you just click the run button and it populates your org with real data based on the formulas and assignments and objectives that you included in your flow solution. And this is one of the coolest parts. So I recommend that you build your flow in a sandbox, right? Because we should always be building stuff in sandboxes. And you can use it to populate that sandbox. But the reality is that we want to have this flow available in every future sandbox. So what we should do for that is, once you're really happy with your flow, move it to production using a change set or using another DevOps tool that you might have access to. Don't run it in production because it will create real data. But the next time you create a sandbox, it'll be in your sandbox with your other metadata, and you can just run it in your new sandbox, and it basically is a self-populating sandbox, which I just think is really cool and elegant and exciting. I can't see you, but I hope some of you are excited too. All right, I'm going to do a live demo, but before we do that, I think now would be a good time to address any questions that that might be on your minds about how to set up this flow. So Rakesh and Michelle, is there anything that I should go back to?
Oh, we've got several questions for you, so we'll run through those super quick before we get to the demo.
All right,
first up from Brad. Could you not just automatically store all fields when you do your get records?
you can, yeah, you can, but you probably don't need to reference those fields later in the flow. So here, if we look at my get records, I'm saying that I want to update the record that I already have with an ID. But you could also store all fields probably in a different variable and then reference that variable later in the flow. This is so fun. I'm ready for the next one.
Awesome. So next question, how many data hierarchy layers can you keep it in the flow? And do you have a sample flow you could share?
Yeah.
That's from Robin.
Cool. Thanks, Robin. So I think I talk about this. Let's see, where does this live? I have this formula here that I think the biggest data set you could make is 140 records across 10 objects, but basically the formula is number of records plus number of objects has to be less than 150 for Flow to be able to handle that number of DMLs, which are the pink buttons. So how deep you can go is up to you. The deeper you go, the fewer, potentially the fewer number of records that you have, just because each object takes up an extra one of your 150 DMLs. But there's no technical limit to which records you create. So you can go to town. You can also create parent records if you want to. It just all has to do with the order of your flow. So I created campaigns first, then I created programs, then I created budgets, and then I created orgs. So so I'll keep going. And then down here, all like close to the bottom, then I created my opportunities because I know my opportunities have so many lookups that I need to have already created those values. And so if you're doing a complex hierarchy, I would recommend that you pay attention to the order that your records get created. So as you get deeper in the hierarchy, the records you need to reference are already there.
Excellent. Do you have a sample flow that you could share as a blueprint?
So I thought about releasing this as an unmanaged package, and I would really welcome feedback about how to do that in a way that's like generalizable and helpful for people, because we all have such different data models. But I will say that how I solved this. So I wrote this up for the admin's blog, which has pretty detailed and some of the same content that's from this presentation that I think will be a great jumping off point. And you know, maybe you can get in touch with me on Twitter or in the Trailblazer community if you have a better idea about how to share a template version of this. I think that could be really cool. I'm just not sure about how to make it effective.
Okay, so next question we've got up is the idea of a single record variable is saved and updated on that record variable after you create a record in Flow. Is that not the case when you're using a collection variable?
Yes. The collection variable creates the records, but it doesn't update the single record variables with the new IDs that it just created. Which has like made me pull my hair out. If that wasn't true, then you wouldn't need to get the records you just created. And maybe one day Flow will have a feature for this. Apex does. If you did this with Apex, when you create a record from a variable, it updates the variable. But unfortunately, Flow doesn't do that yet.
Gotcha. Okay. We have a request for the blog post URL, so we'll try and get to that one I saw that you had there, Samantha.
Yeah. It's also in the slides.
Perfect. So we'll make those available along with the recording. And yes, we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube channel later this afternoon. And Eric is an awesome master who threw that blog post for us in here. So thanks, Eric. I threw that in the chat, so everybody should be able to grab that from there.
Thank you.
Okay, if you're using collection variables to create several records in one DML statement, wouldn't you be able to create more records? That's a question from Jordan.
Unfortunately, no, because you have to then get them if you're referencing them later on. But if you're just creating records that don't, like if you're just creating contacts, for example, and you don't need to reference them later on, then you could make a lot more. So it's all just a question of algebra of, yes, we need to consolidate our creates as much as possible, and that will get you more records to create in your data set. But if some of those records have to be populated in a lookup for another record to be an accurate representation of what you're trying to show, that's how you really use up your DML options. These are really great questions because they really get at the root of the like idea that undergirds why this solution is potentially innovative. So I love it. Let me take like one or two more and then I'll move on to the demo.
Yep, absolutely. So I think we have just one or two more. So right now, where'd it go? Could you check up front for the org ID or name, and if it's production, stop, to make sure that if you have this in prod that somebody doesn't run it by accident, I'm assuming. And that's a question from Mart.
I'm gonna say, I don't know. It sounds viable, but I haven't done it and I don't want to lead anybody astray. So I'm just gonna plead the fifth.
I think it sounds like a great idea. However, you are going to have to hard code in probably your org ID or name, which since it's production, probably isn't the worst violation of that particular rule.
Yeah.
So that's my personal 2 cents.
Thanks.
All right. I think that's all the questions we got for now. I may have missed one or two, so we'll catch them at the end for sure.
Sounds good. All right. So I'm gonna be an intrepid trailblazer and I'm going to show this in production. No, not in production. I would never do that. I'm gonna do this as a live demo, which because I'm nervous feels like it's in production. So I'm in a sandbox in my William Penn Foundation org, and I showed you a ton of screenshots from these, but if anyone wants to drill down further into the different flow elements, then we can come back to that at the end. But first, I'm going to show you, like a good magician, I'm going to show you that there are no records. Let's see. There are no campaigns in here. There's no organizations. I think I have an all organizations list view. There's no organizations. This is an empty sandbox. There's no data in it. So I wanted to show that because I don't want you to be like, but there was already a rabbit in the hat. You didn't actually make it appear. So now what I'm going to do is run this, and it runs pretty quickly. Maybe I should like sing you a song while this is going. So right now it's taking all of those variables that I said, name this campaign this, name this campaign that, and it's going out and creating those records and populating my sandbox with data. It doesn't usually take this long. This is the, okay, good, my flow finished. You know, you can make these messages fancier if you want to, but this is a very workhorse kind of flow where really only you are gonna see it, so there's not much need. So let's refresh this. And we have data. We have an org, one org and another org. And this is all hard coded. So I can say, you know, special language goes here. This is a made up number. And, you know, we didn't do everything that we do in my org. Like we didn't create a box holder for this. There's even an opportunity. And the opportunity is connected to some new records that we created, and it has a record type, and it doesn't have an amount in it. Oh, maybe it does. This one does have an amount, so that's good. It has a close date as of next year, this close date will be in the past, which in my opinion is fine because we always have grants from the past. But you just saw this flow create data in my sandbox without me having to create a single record, which is pretty awesome. I don't know if I have in all contacts here, but there's a whole bunch of different records and object types that were created through the flow. And you are only maybe 2 hours away from being able to do the same thing in your own org, because it's literally just populating the records that you want, creating them, looking them up, and go through your data model and tell your story. And then when you're happy with it, run it in your sandbox. I do have more to share in my presentation, but I feel like if people have more questions about the mechanics of the flow, we should address them now.
Sure. All right. Let me narrow this down to unanswered questions. All right. So Donna chimes in with super creative. Great job, Samantha.
Thanks, Donna. That's so nice.
I think Robin is responding to your better way to maybe deploy this, and the suggestion is flow template. So Robin, if I misrepresented that, please correct me.
Yeah, send me a message on Trailblazer and we'll see if we can whip one of those up.
Yep, a flow template would be cool. I don't know if you can publish that to the App Exchange or put it in a Git repo or unmanaged package it or anything, but a flow template could totally work for that. Okay, so Jesse chimes in with, you might be able to loop through the collection without doing the gets to get your record IDs. So that might be an option.
Thank you. I will definitely explore that. I've done some stuff with loops in other flows, so that's a nice idea.
So, and then Jesse followed up with a question, could you show how you deal with related records?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So here's me assigning values for my to be created opportunity one. So I gave it an amount, a record type, which, like I said, this doesn't have to be hard coded. I just kind of ran out of time. And this is an example of a related record. So for this variable, which is opportunity one, we want to populate the field called board meeting, which is in standard terms primary campaign source, but we just renamed it in my org. And so what I did here was find a variable. So I'm going to call it campaign one dot, and then, oh, no, I did this wrong. Okay. It's down here. These are my record single variables. So I'm going to find campaign one. And now Salesforce knows that this is a variable that has potentially every single field. Some of them populated, some of them not. So I'm going to find campaign ID and put it in here. And I know that this is populated because I previously did a get record for campaign one, going on a little ride, get record for campaign one. And I said, find this record that you just created and put the ID in campaign one, and because I know I'm going to need it later. And so that's how the related record, that's how you populate a record with another related record.
Okay, perfect. All right, Marina chimes in, I have two questions. So have you considered storing testing data in a static resource or custom metadata for a use case where you want to change the training data without changing the flow itself? And would making this a scheduled flow increase the limits for how many records that you can create?
Thank you for those questions. There are really cool ways to make static data sets that you can put into an org, put being a leap. And there's an open source tool called Cumulus CI that can do successive loads of records into an org, and we're going to talk about that later in the presentation. But this solution is kind of premised on that you're not regularly changing the records that are created, or at least the values of them. With the footnote that I am kind of excited about the idea of having 4 or 5 of these, one for training my fundraisers, one for training my field staff, one for training my administrative staff, so that I could support multiple use cases without having to update the same flow. And with the idea that you could create a dev or I'm sorry, create a sandbox with more than one of these running if you're cross-training somebody or you want to show how different apps in your org interact with each other. Maybe one more question, Michelle, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end, but I just want to get through a couple more concepts.
Yep, nope, absolutely. I think, so we've got another one that asked if we could use custom metadata. So we covered that one and we covered the related records. So I think we are good for you to
that much about metadata, just to be very candid. So someone who knows more about it might be able to shed light on it in a different way. I've used it, but not for this type of stuff.
Yeah, honestly, I did an automation hour on this a few years ago where I used custom metadata to create record templates. So I definitely think that would be a good idea to look through.
Great, cool, exciting. Okay, slideshow from current slide. I think we were back here a little bit. Oh, live demo. Okay, we did that. It went well. I can breathe. Cool. So I thought this would be funny because it's like me talking. Tips and warnings. I learned the hard way, so you don't have to. Turn off auto layout to clone elements. Oh my gosh, I wish I knew this when I started this project because I was creating a new assignment for the second opportunity that was the same except a different like amount and a different record type or something. And I was like populating each field. And in auto layout in Flow, you can't clone elements, but in not auto layout, which doesn't have a name, the original, you can. And so I would say while you're building this, consider turning off auto layout so that you can clone elements. It'll save you a bunch of time. Maybe it's called freeform flow. I don't know. Beware of limits. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's definitely freeform is what you're looking for.
Awesome. Maybe one day in auto layout we'll get cloned elements, but I don't know where the flow would put them, which is probably why we don't have them. Beware of limits. So we talked about this. If someone wants to contribute like a really cool flow chart of how to be under this limit, I welcome it because I think that this is one of the clunkier parts of this presentation. And I also want to explore the loop idea that could really, if the loop idea worked, then you could do this for up to like, say like 150 objects, which would be probably more than most people would need. There are other limits that you should be aware of, because anytime you're running a complex automation like Flow, your org, every time it creates one of these records, might be running other code. It just depends on how your org is set up and the level of complexity. And I don't know your org, so I just want to say, like, be careful. You're only doing this in a sandbox, so you should be fine. But I can't promise that you'll get as many records as this. You might need to like lower the batch size or turn off other automations before you run this. So just think with limits in mind as you're trying this out. Use a descriptive naming convention, which I didn't do the greatest example of in my earlier slides, because ultimately you're telling a story. So if you're I'm going to use a nonprofit example because I come from the nonprofit world. But if you're creating a household, you might want to say, like, this is a household with 2 children. This is a household with only one member. This is going to be an organization record type, because you might not otherwise be able to easily tell what's what if you are trying to change how the records get created. And it also helps you as you're going through your paper checklist with coffee stains on it to be like, oh yeah, like I'm going to be creating records that are part of this story. To me, it makes me feel more motivated when I'm doing this type of stuff because it is boring and it is tedious. But then I remember, like, right, the mission of this is so that we can represent, you know, our amazing donors or our amazing sales opportunities. And I think putting in better descriptions can help you, future you, and your successors. I touched on this earlier, so I'm not going to stay on it too much, but instead of trying to do every use case in one flow, you might get more mileage and flexibility out of having different templates for seeding different scenarios in a sandbox based on who you're training. So I would keep that in mind as you're planning your story for what your data set is going to enable your end user to be able to learn. All right, so we talked a lot about what this flow can do. In the last part of my presentation, I'm going to share a little bit about what flow can't do based on a couple of what if scenarios that you might come up with. What if you need different data every time? What if you need large quantities of data? You need to reference a lot more objects, or if you just don't believe me that this idea is feasible, I won't be offended. Seeding sandboxes with flow just doesn't work for every situation. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so proud of the work that that I've gotten to do with the data generation toolkit team. We wrote this long form documentation that's publicly available. We can put the link in the chat. That takes you through a story, so you get to meet this admin named Alex and how they learn that they need to start testing, and then they realize that they have to create data outside of Salesforce and then move it into Salesforce. So that's like one of the building blocks. And then the next building block is, wait, can I create this data inside of Salesforce the whole time, which is part of what I'm showing you here. And then there's like further building blocks for more complicated types of data generation and test data activities. Some examples we've come up with are representing student data for schools. You have much higher threshold for privacy concerns. So you might want to have sandboxes that have totally made up data. You might need large volumes of data specifically to test automations, and Flow is just not the right tool for that. But it turns out that there are lots of choices for tools that are, and we wrote up as many of them as we had capacity for, and we're also maintaining this resource. And I think it could be a wonderful resource for many of you. And then there's the gold standard of fake data generation, which is an open source tool that is supported by salesforce.org called Snowfakery, which lets you use a lot more complicated logic to make deeply related records to each other. Like the hierarchy can go on and on and on, and you can randomly assign values, and you can just do like this. You can create millions of records. The sky's the limit. It's so cool. The way it works is that you write what's called a recipe in a programming language called YAML, which is relatively admin friendly as programming languages go. It's pretty human readable. And then you feed it into your command line using whatever you use on your computer, and using another tool from salesforce.org called Cumulus CI, and those tools together can put unbelievable amounts of data into a sandbox, a scratch org, a dev org, or even production, although we don't recommend it. It's so cool. It's taken me years to even learn the tip of the snowflake, basically. But what I wanted to share here is that, oh, this didn't go where I expected it. It's a good link, but it's not what I was just thinking it was going to show. Okay. This will go to an article about snowflakery, but we also have a GitHub repository where we have community vetted recipes for common nonprofit use cases for generating data into a Salesforce org. And it's something that we're really proud of and that we want more people to contribute to and benefit from. So that is an exciting way to expand some of the concepts beyond what you can do simply in Flow. And as I'm going to land the plane very soon, I talked about the open source commons group in the beginning of the presentation, and it's also where I want to end. I did not come up with the Flow solution in a vacuum. I came up with it because we have been trying to figure out all of the different ways to solve this problem. And it's just been really a highlight to get to collaborate with some really brilliant people. And Mark Baseman and the admin evangelism team were generous enough to publish an earlier version of this presentation as a blog post, which has given us more feedback and visibility into the concepts we're working on. And they have contributed invaluably to getting us to this point. I really encourage you to try out these ideas and then get back in touch with us so that we can learn how it went, how you expanded and iterated on the ideas, and even contributing back to the project. If you come up with a really great template, we can put it into a GitHub repo. So this really truly is, not only is it collaborative, but we have designated infrastructure to support that collaboration and help us maintain consistency with lots of people contributing. And I just want you to know that your contributions are welcome. And if you're new to this kind of thing, your contributions are also welcome. That's how I learned this kind of stuff, and we're really open and welcoming to people who are exploring stuff like this for the first time. So thank you for the opportunity. We have a little bit more time for questions, but really I'm so thrilled to be here with Automation Hour. I really am thankful for your deep engagement with these pretty complicated questions we're trying to answer. And I look forward to connecting with you on social channels and hearing about your success with using Flow to populate sandboxes with valid test data.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Samantha, for being here for sure.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, so running back through our comments. Oh, we've got a whole slew of people letting us know that we have some excellent news. Copy and paste elements is now available in auto layout.
No way.
So, yep.
Is that in the latest release?
It might be. It's called copy element and then paste copied element. So when you click the element that you want to copy, you paste it onto a new plus sign somewhere, and that's where it will insert the pasted component.
I'm gonna have to update my own work on this. Very cool. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so Rich Donovan asks, have you thought about using in your flow the CSV to records custom component from unofficial SF website to load different sets of data via screen flows, and then you can pick the files you want to use?
I have thought about it briefly, not enough to give a super intelligent answer, but I think you might need to do that one object at a time. I'm not sure how that component handles CSVs with referencing more than one object. And one of the things I was trying to do here was create deeply related records. And so I'm not sure how it would handle that use case, and that's why I haven't done more work on it.
Okay, so Ben asks, are there snowfakery recipes for the FSC model?
Not yet. Field service, no, what's FSC? Someone help me out.
Financial Services Cloud, I believe, is what they're
Okay.
referring to.
Thank you. I'm not well informed about the clouds on the industry and for-profit side, which is one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be here, because it's a great learning opportunity for me. Not currently, but we are super open to those contributions. And it's really easy to contribute files in the Snowfakery recipes repo. I can post a link to it in the Automation Hour Trailblazer group. Right now, most of the data models that we have are all on the nonprofit and higher ed side, but there's no reason why it has to be limited to that. And we're actually really excited to expand it with more participation from the community.
Fantastic. All right, I'm doing one more refresh on the community. I think we've gotten through all of the answers on Q&A, or the questions on Q&A. All right, Samantha,
Cool.
I think we've leveraged our hour and we've questioned them out.
Thank you so much. This was a great experience. I hope that this content is valuable for all of you who are still around and for all of you who listen to the recording. I'm happy to hear from Trailblazers who are working on this, even if you got stuck or if you just need some encouragement. So by all means, and thank you to the hosts for making this session possible, and to the sponsors.
Yep, we're thrilled to have you. Glad first time presenter joining us. So we hope you come back sometime.
Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend for those of you where weekend is starting very, very soon. And be well.
All right, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.